crowd.
Shall we go and sit? No? They're doing
They're about to start. Spot me. AD Connect.
No?
And then you guys.
Rather than staying here. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's program will begin with a short explanation of the AD Connect app.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the presentation of AD Connect. My name is Alex Martin, and I'm with the German Marshall Fund of the United States.
Indeed, welcome. My name is Mohamed Al-Harraq, and I'm from OCP Policy Center.
We are very excited to having this tool. We are trying year by year to increase our efforts of going paperless.
That is true, and you know what? Morocco just hosted the COP22. It was a great success, so we have to cherish that legacy. That's why we went paperless, but we also have some pocket agendas that were printed, so we ask you for forgiveness.
Okay, I would like to invite everyone now to grab your smartphone or your iPad, open the AD Connect, the application. I hope you have it installed. If not, we have persons on the venue that will help you do that.
Okay.
And let's go through together.
So once you open the app, you can click on the left tab, and then all the sections and the features appear. And Alex, I would suggest that we start with the main one, which is the agenda.
Of course. Let's go to the agenda, and we have each day structured. You will see for each of the session, you can get on the tabs and find more information. My kind request is to have your app always synced and just check it from time to time, because that's the only way you will see if there are updates in the schedule.
Okay. Can we show them one of the sessions, for instance?
Okay, let's go to actually the first plenary that it's upcoming.
Okay.
Once you press the tab, you will have a new window open. You will see that the sessions and all the sessions that are taking place in this Grand Salon are on the record. As you scroll, you can see the session description that will give you an idea of the conversation, the angles that we embraced, the guiding questions, as well as the lineup, the speakers and the moderators. You can find more information once you press the tabs for each moderator or panelist. In addition to that, as we go back, we have two other important tabs. One is the speakers tab, Atlantic Dialogue speakers. So the 114 speakers that we have during 3 days are all listed alphabetically, and you can find more information about them. The second important tab is participants. So we have everyone who's attending AD listed there in order to get to know each other and be able to connect. But I'll get there shortly.
Okay, well, before we close the main section, I want to introduce one of the very important features, which is research and analysis. And so that's very important for us as institutions. As we do this convening, we also want to have strong research. So if you go to research and analysis, Alex, you can go there and you'll have the publications that both institutions published, but also the Atlantic Currents, which is a publication that we do in parallel for the Atlantic Dialogues. We have, you can download it. On the website, you can have access through the app, but also we had to print some copies, so we're sorry again, especially for Benoit's chapter, which is about climate. And I also want to thank our authors who agreed to join us this year for this amazing experience, which is Atlantic Currents.
This is the first day, and we have over 350 participants. So we can imagine that planning is actually an art. That's why we are here to give you all the necessary logistical support.
Well, let's go to logistics then, which is a whole main section in the app. If you go to logistical information, which will load as we're talking, you will see where Alex is when is she arriving, when is she leaving, the hotel, the conference venue. If you scroll down, Alex, you'll find the conference venue information, which is La Mamounia, its address. So everything is there, even the pickup times. But at the same time, we know that some answers you might not find it because it's not loaded. So you can just ask logistics anytime by sending an email. We will receive it and respond swiftly.
Okay, Mohammed, why don't we go to something more interactive? How do we engage with each other during AD?
Well, engagement is very important. AD Connect is about connecting us as a community. So, Alex, let's do some quick brainstorming.
Okay, I think I would like to hear, or actually to see, what is in your mind when you hear about the Atlantic dialogues. We will use the word cloud, which is one of the interactive features through which you will be able to engage. As we press the word cloud, and all of you who have the app, please go there, and you are able to insert just one word that comes to your mind when you hear about us. Let's see if it loads. Only one word, otherwise the feature will not work. And we have also a time elapse, so just insert your words. Don't forget to click
enter as well.
Insert your words.
The moderators are gonna use these features to engage with you and the speakers because it's very important to have also interactive sessions.
The bigger the word becomes, it means that more people actually inserted that specific word, and we know what direction or what people think. Okay. Integration, anticipation, innovation.
Okay, collaboration.
I think we have a winner. Huh?
Also everything here is positive, so that's already good news.
Good to know. Let's go back. Let's see if my app works.
Okay.
And we have another feature that we would like to present. And I would like you to vote. And I would like also to challenge your historical knowledge about La Mamounia. Do you know when this hotel was built? If not, you will actually be given some options. Let's see if we get the answers on.
Alex, don't vote. I feel like you know the answer, so don't give that away.
I promise not to do that. So you will have to insert just the number that corresponds to the answer you think it's correct. And you can start the voting now. You have 20 seconds to insert your option. Let's see who's the winner.
The badge.
You can do it with mine.
Do you actually know the answer? I actually
don't know. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So almost everybody knew the answer.
Okay, wow.
Great. Let's go back. We also have a feature called questions and answers, and that can be used throughout the sessions. So make sure that you upload your questions while you hear the panelists speaking. How do we exchange information with each other?
Paperless, Alex. Let me show you. Ooh. So you can just actually, I'm going to use your profile if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's see if I will accept.
You can just go to business cards, and then click on the tab here to exchange virtual business card.
All of you have on the badge a QR code.
So what I'm going to do is actually scan the QR code.
Let's see if we do it right. No. Where are we?
Okay, one of us have to move. So
it's either you or me, and I think it's you.
Okay. There you go.
No, we don't get it.
There you go. Okay, got it. So
let's see.
Now I have your business card in my profiles.
I have to accept you first.
Well, I hope you're going to do that.
Okay, so the other person, once the QR code is scanned, has to accept the request. And only then the information will be shared between the two persons. Going back, once you have connected, you can also request a meeting. So in case you want to meet with me, Mohammed.
Okay, so I can just go to request a meeting and, under the personal information and go to request meeting on the right side, invite people. So I would type my last name, EL space H-A.
H-A, Harar.
Yeah,
oh, I already forgot your name.
R-R.
And you can add the location, the timing, everything you want, and you can meet at the nice venue but please try to be during the conference inside and listen to our amazing speakers. And if we did not convince you yet to get social, we have a tab in the app for that. Getting social means connecting your social media accounts and share the word about where you are at the Atlantic Dialogues about Marrakesh. We have hashtag Atlantic Dialogues that can be used during the conference. So make sure you do that.
Please do that as well. You know, Alex, the conference is serious, the topics are serious, but the convening is fun. So what we added this year is a challenge. It's called the Country Challenge, and it goes in the same context of the business cards. So if you go to the Country Challenge,
I went already.
and once you scan the QR code, a country is added of that person in this challenge. But the point is, you have to gather as many countries as possible, and good luck, because there are 50 countries represented here in this room. So,
And I'm ahead of everyone because I already have Morocco
Yes.
on the list. That's all. If you need support with the AD Connect, we have one of our colleagues from SpotMe outdoors, or you can ask any of the persons that have red lanyards to direct you, and then you can get also an iPad on loan to use throughout the conference. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoy the 3 days with us.
please do enjoy it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, Dr. Karen Domfried, and Managing Director of the OCP Policy Center, Dr. Karim El Anawi.
Of the Atlantic Dialogues. I'm Karen Domfried, and I think, as all of you know, Atlantic Dialogues is a joint initiative of the German Marshall Fund of the United States and the OCP Policy Center. I know that I am just delighted to have so many of you here for this 5th edition, and I couldn't be happier than to be in Marrakesh together with Karim El Anawi, who is the Managing Director of the OCP Policy Center. Karim has been a wonderful partner, and I know that he feels like I do, that we're both exceptionally lucky to have an incredibly skilled set of colleagues who really are the ones who make the magic happen here at Atlantic Dialogues. That said, the magic wouldn't happen without the original inspiration. And that inspiration for us came from Dr. Mustafa Tarab, and he will be joining us in the course of the afternoon. But I did just want to applaud his vision in setting up Atlantic Dialogues. Atlantic Dialogues, together with a joint research program, was launched in 2012 as an initiative promoting a fresh approach to cooperation around the Atlantic as a whole, north-south as well as east-west. We are deeply honored that this year's event, once again, will take place under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI. The overarching theme of this 5th edition of Atlantic Dialogues is changing mental maps, strategies for an Atlantic in transition. And it occurs to me that we probably should have done a word cloud to see what that says to all of you, changing mental maps. We felt the transition piece of the theme was particularly apt at this time. If we think about just the last year alone, we have seen so many developments on all sides of the Atlantic that make open debate with diverse voices more important than ever. The rise of populist politics and resurgent nationalism, slow economic growth, and rising inequality, open-ended conflicts, terrorism, political violence, and continuing migration pressures challenge us all. But there are also opportunities, from the energy revolution to an increasingly dynamic workforce, from the digital revolution to innovations in agriculture, infrastructure, and governance. All these issues are on the agenda here in Marrakesh. We want to use Atlantic Dialogues to encourage you to rethink your mental maps about the Atlantic and about transatlantic relations. We believe that there is great potential in an Atlantic community that works together to build a better future. I want to highlight the insights in this year's edition of Atlantic Currents, a unique annual review of developments around the wider Atlantic. It is a key product of the research and analysis we have undertaken in partnership with the OCP Policy Center. This year's edition was just launched today, and the authors are here with us. So I'd encourage all of you to pick up a copy and take advantage of opportunities to talk with those authors here in Marrakesh.
And coffee is offered.
And coffee's offered for any conversation, absolutely. I also want to welcome especially another group of participants, and those are our emerging leaders. And I see you around the room, but everyone just raise your hand if you're one of our emerging leaders. And they actually have fabulous purple striped scarves. So some of them are even wearing those, which makes them very easy to spot. Their program started on Monday, and it's featured policy discussions and leadership development sessions. And we just couldn't be more excited about this year's group of 40 Atlantic leaders. I want to underscore that there were 1,500 applicants for these spots, which is just remarkable and shows how successful that aspect of the program has become over these 5 years. I had the pleasure, along with Kareem, of having dinner with all of them on Monday evening, and they really are awesome. So another set of participants to be sure to seek out this week. You're going to hear from them throughout Atlantic Dialogues. They're speakers on many of our sessions. Finally, I want to extend a warm welcome to everybody who's watching us live on satellite worldwide. So just so you know, all of this is on the record, and there are lots of folks around the Atlantic community and beyond who are watching and experiencing this with us. So let me just conclude by saying that I think difficult times call for bold approaches. Our mission is very simply to strengthen transatlantic cooperation. I think you will agree that mission has never been more important. It is in that spirit that we convene here in Marrakesh. Once again, welcome to Atlantic Dialogues 2016. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's always a pleasure. Let me also welcome you here in Marrakesh, which is a city that has 7 scenes around the city, and that are it's a city full of spirituality, and that shows the feasibility of compassion. They have been here for centuries, and it's also a way for you to connect with Morocco, with Marrakesh, which is a millennial city at the crossroad of many civilizations. So I encourage you to visit. We can help you to go and visit those 7 scenes. They're quite specialized. It's too long to explain here, but what is there is compassion, and the feasibility of an ethical life, of relating to others with affection. So I think it's important to feel the vibe of these very special cities. Let me be more serious now as an economist. Well, Karen, you depicted a gloom world, and the list is long, and our capacity to react has been quite inefficient, I would say, as a global community, and there are many reasons for that. The first reason is that we refuse to see the elephants in the room. So I'll give you 2 seconds to think of big elephants that we never mention, but that are there. They're so big that we don't want to see them. And we don't want to see them because the cost of, seeing this elephant is too high. We prefer to, deal with this ex post. It's easier to deal with crisis, and we had a very nice session with Nick Gowing, who is here, yesterday about this. Why is in public policy we are not able to get together, have serious discussions, and deal with this kind of issues? And I invite you to, to read the fantastic work that Nick has been doing on thinking the unthinkable. And it is really appropriate and timely. And I hope that we will unmask a few of those elephants while we are, here together to improve public policy, which is at the heart of what the OCP Policy Center tries to do. And this is where we meet also with our friends at the German Marshall Fund. There is a common ambition. We are quite realistic, I think, together. We are realistic by construction. This is a discussion that I have with Hubert Védrine, who is here at lunch. When you're a small country or a medium-sized country like Morocco, you have no choice to be realistic because you're just taking the grand game that is being played by the great powers. So by construction, we are realistic, and I think the South can bring to the Atlantic also this dimension of realism and bring our friends from the North that sometimes tend to see, large objective with lots of, dreams maybe sometimes that are not necessarily conducive to, great outcomes in many regions. And you listed the long list of issues that the Atlantic community and beyond, in particular the Middle East, but it goes beyond, of serious problems that we have to tackle. And this is where the originality of the Atlantic Dialogue, it is a community, and you are part of this community. Some of you have been here at the 5 editions. Some of you are joining us today. So it is really what we're trying to do here is an open platform for dialogue in the spirit of the 7 sins of Marrakesh, I would say, with compassion, openness. But we can say things. We can say, these are the elephants. These are your elephants. These are mine. But we can have serious and tough discussions. And I encourage you to have very frank and open discussions in this room, but there are also more smaller gatherings where we want your opinion. It's not because we are here that we are, preaching anything. This is for you. This is an event for all of us as a community. And what we are trying to do is also create a dynamic. This is not a one standalone event. We've done together the Atlantic Strategy Group, and we've gathered in São Paulo, Brazil. We've gathered in Senegal, also in Dakar, doing smaller sized events to continue to push our agenda. What is our agenda? There's no such a notion of the Atlantic as geopolitician we understand it. This is very original. There are ways the world is organizing itself. This is the legacy of history, many reasons. But we are trying to create complementarities, and particularly for us here in Morocco, as a middle-income country on the African continent, we want the Atlantic to see Africa's economic development as the opportunity of the century to transform the global world. This is the last frontier of development. There are low-hanging fruits. We need to focus on this. There are humongous returns for the global capital, and in combination with the energy transitions. These are the two potential engine of growth, more sustainable growth, more balanced growth for the future. And actually, if you look at Atlantic Current, which Karen, you mentioned, in the annexes, there are many data and analytics on the Atlantic. And if you take in this region, countries that are growing above 5% about the past 10 years, they're all Africans. They're all African countries on the yearly average. They're all African countries. So this is a fantastic opportunity for the community as a whole. We have fantastic complementarities in natural resources, in human capital, in redesigning the global chain, etc. One elephant in the room is China. Of course, we have some Chinese participants, so we can engage them, and let's see how we can steer, collaboration, and also from our traditional partners to address this challenge where we all will be winning of pushing the frontier of economic development in Africa. And we are really passionate about that. Also, what we try to create here is a decentralized, autonomous platform for project, for dialogue, for networks, in the spirit of the blockchain. And it is already happening. I am told that our emerging leaders are already doing business. So this is a great news. They've been pitching their projects yesterday in town hall meetings, and some are already, getting together to do some business. Business is good. We need people to be, to thrill, to make money, and to redistribute wealth as well. Always in the spirit of being benevolent to the others, to being compassionate, and to be able to dialogue. So, in a nutshell, this is what I wanted to share with you. And please use this opportunity to, connect to us. We both, our institutions, are very open institutions. We like to engage with others. There are many. I see many opportunities for this. And maybe the last word that I like, and that, in addition to compassion, is also trust. We are here also to create a trust protocol between us. And with this, we are trying to create that environment, that protocol, so we can go further in terms of the dialogue we have together, in terms of improving the public policies of our government, in terms of opening space for the youth. We are also space creator as think tanks. And this is not GMF OCP Policy Center. This is also you. We have about 40 think tanks here that are present. And I think the role of think tanks is essential in creating that space. So, thank you for being here. I want to acknowledge the presence of former President Obasanjo is here. We have also former President Duhalde that has joined us. We have many officials. So please let us know. Engage with us. We're here for this. And thank you for coming here in Marrakesh. Thank you.
So we are extremely lucky to be kicking off Atlantic Dialogues with a conversation that will feature the Honorable Eduardo Duhalde, the former president of Argentina. Now, the conversation will be in Spanish, so for those of you who are not Spanish speakers, you will find headsets. So please go ahead and grab those now and get them adjusted. And with that, I will turn the floor over to our wonderful moderator, the BBC's Alan Kasujja. Alan, welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome President Duhalde as he comes in. Yeah, please. I put on my headsets earlier on so that I'd not forget, because this is going to be a conversation in Spanish. And great to see President Obasanjo here. And I think, as an African journalist, I speak to President Duhalde with a curious mind. I'm not going to assume that I know anything about what's going on in Latin America, but he is very qualified to educate us, because he was president of Argentina. What channel is, can someone help us? What's the channel for the Spanish? Number three. Okay, let's just sort that out. But as I was saying, you know, he's brilliant. He was president of Latin America, president of Argentina, and he was president for just over 1 year. So it will be an opportunity for us to learn.
Ahora sí.
Can you hear me now?
Perfecto.
Perfecto. Okay, so I'm approaching this conversation with a very curious mind because I need to learn about what's going on in Latin America. As a journalist, I talk about Latin America quite a bit, but also as an African, I'm curious about what's going on there. Let's just start with you. You've been in public service for a very long time. You were mayor of Buenos Aires and you served as president as well. Where is Latin America now and where has it been in the past? That's the translator, in case you're wondering.
Bueno, en primer lugar agradecer al Diálogo del Atlántico que me invitasen, y creo que lo han hecho fundamentalmente para hablar de Sudamérica.
I'm afraid we can't hear the speaker. We have a microphone. We will speak of South America, Atlantic South America. Most of the people who live there, it's mostly low-populated countries. Suriname, Venezuela, Guyana, the French Guiana and Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina. These are the countries that are along the Atlantic. Our link with the North Atlantic has been mostly a relation with Europe. As you know, we were colonies, either Spanish or Portugal. Brazil is one of the largest Portuguese colonies in South America, which comprises half of Southern American population. Except for Venezuela and Colombia, we've all known military dictatorships from the 60s. Certain countries, such as mine, we have experienced 4 military dictatorships. Luckily, these times are now over. Democracy is strong because the armies lost the opportunity to.
You said democracy is strong, but what does democracy in that part of the world look like?
قلتم إن الديمقراطية مهمة، ولكن ما هو شكل الديمقراطية في هذا الجزء من العالم؟ رأينا ما حدث في البرازيل حيث الرئيسة تم استبعادها من الرئاسة.
Is that what does democracy look like in Latin America at the moment?
Bueno, desgraciadamente, según el barómetro latinoamericano, más de la mitad de los
Well, according to opinion polls, barometers, the most important thing for the population is how their issues are addressed. There might have been some coups but this is the past. Now we have many problems because Brazil is still the most important country in Southern America. This famous impeachment of the president. There are many problems in my country. Our new government is more open onto the world. Open to the north. Our concern now is the tone of the speech of the president-elect and his discourse towards Mexico. We hope this rhetoric will not be followed through with similar action.
So you talk about the rhetoric of President-elect. Presumably you're talking about the President of the United States of America. We'll come to that in a bit. But you are also working quite hard on regional integration. And tell us a little bit about that and why that is very important for your region.
El proceso de integración en los países latinoamericanos están,
In Latin American
para
countries,
que tengamos ideas, los aquí presentes, hay 13 procesos
there
de
are
integración. Yo digo, cuando hay 13, prácticamente
integration
no hay ninguno.
processes.
13 proyectos de integración.
It's like saying there are none. There are 13 different programs. There was the CELA, one project aiming to integrate Spanish-speaking countries, but it doesn't work for the moment. What's important in the integration process is the Andean Pact and then the Mercosur, and then the Pacific Alliance. But we believe that the great richness that we have among Atlantic countries should be leveraged to boost growth. And this is where I believe my country in particular will open to Africa and create important relationships with African countries.
Okay, is there anybody in the audience that speaks Spanish that would like to have a question, that has a question for the former president? Yeah, oh, yes, please. Let's get a microphone over here if we can, and then we have another question here. Any other person from that region that is interested in asking any specific questions at all?
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Señor presidente, yo quisiera... Estoy aquí, enfrente. No, estoy aquí. No me mira. A la izquierda.
No importa, hable.
Bueno, ya me ves. Bueno, muchas gracias, señor presidente, por su intervención.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for your speech. I have two questions for you. You've just said that Africa is an opportunity for Latin American countries.
Que la posibilidad de crecimiento en África. Ahora usted, señor presidente, ¿cómo ve esta
una
proyección
growth?
Argentina hacia África? La segunda pregunta.
How do you see the growth of the Argentine relationship with Africa?
Lo que se refiere a la integración regional en Latinoamérica.
And you've done a lot of work towards Southern American integration. In Africa, we're far from this. Maybe we could work together. Truth be told, we are very open to the opening of South America to Africa, and Brazil has always been at the forefront of this bridge building. What you must understand is that countries as ours, with so many dictatorships and coups, makes it difficult to have a consistent policy towards Africa. And I believe that the time has come with a peaceful situation despite major economic problems and organized crime, international organized crime, which is a big problem in our countries. We must deal with these issues
tenemos que ir
including drug use.
tratando de ayudarnos entre los países sudamericanos.
So
de qué
therefore,
manera conformamos organismos
we are cooperating
parecidos a la DEA, por
at a
ejemplo,
super-regional level,
para poder resolver estos problemas que son muy, pero muy, muy grandes.
and we are working, for example, with the DAA to find solution to these very serious problems.
Okay, so let's take another question here.
Sí, presidente, soy Miguel Ángel Moratinos, ministro de Asuntos Exteriores de España. Le agradezco su presencia y su intervención me ha hecho recordar una iniciativa que con Marruecos intentamos lanzar en el periodo del gobierno del señor Zapatero, que era el Atlántico Sur. Era la iniciativa Lanzarote.
We've been working on the Southern Atlantic Project. I represent the Ministry of Spain. So this project was a way of building bridges between the two shores of the Atlantic. But I'd just like to point out, not pointing fingers, but just like to point out how that somebody from Europe can lead this initiative. I believe that the time has come for our relations to be built between all Atlantic countries, which is why we are here. And which is why I said, as I said before, the president of Argentina will visit Morocco and put forward the values of Atlantic countries. For example, the quantity of drinkable water, potable water. We have huge water resources. And the Pampa is a great bread basket, so we have great things to bring to the Atlantic countries.
Let's get a question in from this lady as well. And the reason I'm asking for the questions to be in Spanish is so that we can move along as quickly as we can.
Muchas gracias por la oportunidad y realmente es un placer. Yo soy brasilera peruana, entonces estoy siempre, digamos, contenta cuando veo la colaboración y la presencia de América Latina y las posibilidades de
I am Colombian
con otras regiones.
I'm very happy to see cooperation between the different regions. I'm Peruvian and Brazilian. And the two previous points covered some things I wanted to talk about, specifically Brazil, which had a very important presence in Africa under President Lula. As you know, Brazil has one of the most important populations
because we've run out of time.
descending from Africans. My question now is, what are the economic topics or investment that could prove to be practical opportunities for collaboration? I am not a specialist on these. The specialists in my country seem to say that, believe that we have complementary economies. I'm afraid I couldn't really fill in the details. It's not my field, so I can't really respond fully to your question. But let's hope there will be some specialists who will be able to respond fully to your question.
Yeah, let's take that lady behind over there. Make it as brief as possible because we've actually run out of time.
Mucho gusto, mi nombre es Carolina Bruschi, soy profesora de la Universidad Central de Venezuela y le quería preguntar precisamente sobre la actual situación de Venezuela en el Mercosur. Venezuela está suspendida, el bloque se encuentra actualmente estableciendo una relación más sólida con la Unión Europea, ¿Cómo considera usted que esto puede afectar la dinámica del bloque y la
I'm
situación de
from
la región
Venezuela.
por esta polémica tan grande que se ha
Venezuela
suscitado?
has been
Y en
expelled from
segundo lugar,
Mercosur.
la tendencia marcada que ha habido
How
con la Alianza del
do you think
Pacífico
this will
e incluso la
affect
Alianza Transpacífico. El mundo pareciera estar migrando hacia los
the
megablocks.
Trans-Pacific
La situación del
Partnership
Brexit pareciera
and
marcar que
generally
ya la integración no busca la
regional
supranacionalidad,
integration?
sino otros tipos de integración.
Are
¿Cómo cree
we,
usted que la
does
llegada de Donald
integration
Trump a la
go through
presidencia de Estados Unidos
supranationality?
afecta esta nueva tendencia?
Or
Primero,
with,
el tema de
and how will
Venezuela y
Donald
su
Trump will
suspensión
affect these
del Mercosur
relationships?
no creo que tenga
So
ninguna
first, let's
incidencia
mention Venezuela and being expelled
El
from the
caso de Venezuela
Mercosur.
es muy especial. Es uno de
I
los dos
don't
países
think it will
que
have
nunca
much
tuvo
effect.
dictadura militar.
Venezuela
Sin embargo,
is
es una
very
situación muy
special as it
difícil,
has
criterios generalizados
never
de
had
la
a
región.
military
Es el único
dictatorship
gobierno cívico
and is
militar que
now
aún existe
in a difficult
en
situation.
América. En la segunda pregunta no recuerdo. Una por vez.
The second question, could you remind me, please?
Donald Trump is the president
Donald
elect,
Trump,
yes.
tenemos mucho miedo, y más los mexicanos.
We are very much afraid of Mr. Trump,
Okay, so they're very afraid of Mr.
President-elect,
Trump.
much more than the Mexicans are.
Let's just say thank you very much to the president. Now there's a conversation that's coming on immediately after us, and you will have an opportunity to ask all those questions for those of you who are sitting on them. But in the meantime, let's thank President Duhalde very much for this introductory remark.
We'd like to thank His Excellency.
Gracias.
And thank you. Please give a warm round of applause for His Excellency.
The Atlantic neighborhood represents a rich tapestry of peoples and nations. While the cultures, traditions, markets, and politics of Europe, Africa, and the Americas vary widely, the Atlantic space forms a community of shared economic and security interests. To understand this community, we need to move beyond the narratives of East and West, North and South. Globalization has accelerated the pace of change across the region, transforming lives and livelihoods while knitting the nations of the Atlantic ever more closely to other parts of the globe. Managing these changes is critical for transatlantic success. What are the forces shaping the Atlantic community? How do we harness them to ensure equity and opportunity for individuals and nations across the region? What are the mental maps that will empower us to wisely chart a course for our shared future? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the first plenary, BBC journalist Zainab Badawi.
Thank you very much indeed. Assalamu alaikum. Ahlan wa sahlan. Mr. President, where are you? There you are. Very nice to see you, sir. Ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. So it is my great pleasure to be with this wonderful gang we have here to start this plenary, which I hope is going to be the beginning of many interesting and fruitful discussions you're going to have throughout the course of these dialogues. So, Mr. President, you have already been introduced to the panel. You've heard what President Duhalde said, but what we are going to kick around with the panel and with all of you is this issue of changing mental maps.
Yes.
Strategies for an Atlantic in transition. That's what we're going to look at. And, you know, there are various topics. You've looked at your programs. You know, there are various things that are going to be discussed. But that's what we want to kind of give you a bit of a framework as to see whether there are challenges, what those challenges are, and how we can perhaps try to give some suggestions as to how we can foster dialogue, which is, after all, the objective and aim of this these Atlantic dialogues. Are you happy, Mr. President? Yeah? Just check with him. Good? Is that all right? I think there was a little bit of a problem with the headphones. All right, good. Paulo Portas, I'm going to come to you first. Paulo Portas. Why not? Oh, can you hear?
Ahora oído bien.
Oh, good. Excellent. I don't speak Spanish, but I understood that much. Paulo Portas. So Paulo Portas is a man of great political experience, although he's had many incarnations. He started life as a journalist. You're also a historian by training, and then you traded journalism for politics, and he was leader of the Conservatives in Portugal for 16 years. He was Deputy Prime Minister until October last year when, although you won the election, you were 7 seats short of a full majority, so your party did not form part of the government. And you've decided to take a break from politics, and he's now working in the private sector where he works as a strategic consultant dealing with Europe and Africa. So when we talk about an Atlantic in transition, Paulo, do you see an Atlantic in transition briefly? And if so, what is that transition about?
Zainab, I would follow the subject. I mean, changing minds. Everything is changing, and we have all to prepare for further changes. If you consider Atlantic relations, obviously the election in the United States will impact those relations. First of all, because the new elected president wants to try a different policy towards Russia. And this will impact seriously on traditional diplomacy on the European side. I personally think, I'm worried with a lot of things on the new president elected, but I think the Russian question is a chance and not a drama. A lot of European politicians, and I would say even more American politicians, look at Moscow with the eyes we used to look to Soviet Union. What you have in Moscow is no more Soviet Union. It's not a global totalitarian project served by a military coercive alliance. What you have in Moscow is Russia, with more than 1,000 years. It's autocratic, it's centralized. They have almost 100 nationalities in their territory. You have to try to do business with them.
Okay, so you're saying Mr. Trump is right on this?
No, I'm saying it's a chance. And I call your attention to one thing. He was not supposed to become candidate, and he became. He was not supposed to be a Republican, and he became. He was not supposed to win the primaries, and he won. He was not supposed to be elected, and he was. Just one thing more. He was elected under the accusation of being manipulated by Russia. Never in the American history happened such a thing. And he was elected. He has free hands to
but
try
the point you're making,
a different...
You'll get a chance to live again on this point. Just wanted you to...
Can you imagine the consequences on Iran, on Syria, on...
So you're saying that the transition is being led by the United States because you have a president-elect who's going to tilt Washington a bit more towards Russia, and that may put him at loggerheads with Europe, which is still saying maintain the sanctions because of Ukraine and all that kind of thing.
I would advise not to use classic thoughts to try to analyze Mr. Trump. Nothing classic.
I wasn't analysing Mr. Trump. I was trying to analyse what you were saying, my friend.
Let me just tell you that. Nothing classic. Right or left.
All right. But you're just saying, we know that Rex Tillerson...
is going to be nativist, protectionist, and isolationist. But on global issues, I would say the main question is China, but the first question is Russia.
Right, okay, fine. And we've got that. So Rex Tillerson, who's his nominee for Secretary of State, proudly wearing his medal of the Order of Friendship with Russia. This is one way of you saying that...
So he decided to ignore, the president decided to ignore 99% of the critics, and he decided to nominate a Secretary of State with that curricula.
All right, Carlos Lopez, that's sitting next to you, Paulo. Of course, Carlos Lopez, known to many of you, who stepped down in October as head of UNECA, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Carlos, one of Guinea-Bissau's greatest exports, is a great Africanist and also internationalist. He worked at the United Nations Development Programme for many, many years, and also as an academic. And he is now a visiting professor at Oxford University, but also all the way down south to the University of Cape Town in South Africa. I wonder which way you do it. The summers in Oxford and the winter in Cape Town? Winter in the UK. Oh, well, we'll work it out. Okay, so Carlos Lopez. Changing mental maps. When it comes to the part of the world that you know best, the big challenge for you is going to actually even get Africa to register mentally for people, because when you hear what was just said about Donald Trump, I don't think we've heard him say a thing about Africa, but not just the United States. When we're talking about an Atlantic in transition, what do you see? How would you survey the landscape from your perspective?
Well, one way of really putting it is to say that Africa doesn't feature because people are ignorant. If they weren't, we would realize that any region of the world that doubles its GDP in less than 15 years, which is the case, it only happened once in history, which was in China, and otherwise in small countries, is something to watch. You take into account that Africa has a larger share of world trade than India, a larger GDP than India, a larger number of computers and internet connection than India, a larger attractiveness of foreign direct investment than India. Why is it that we are talking about India as the star performer and Africa as if it didn't exist? That's a problem of mindset. And it's a mindset that is now going to be a bit more easy for us to present in a different way, because we have a level playing field. What happened with the elections in Europe, in the US, in a number of other countries, is to demonstrate that that type of democracy that was based on distribution of wealth is no longer there. Europe and the US are facing difficulties with their democratic dispensation because there is inequality or recessive economies. And because they can't distribute, they face the music.
Can we look at the socio-political picture, I should have said first, before we move to the economics of why the Atlantic is in transition? So from a socio-political point of view, you've already said that Africa doesn't register for, you know, the United States, the powerful countries that make up the Atlantic basin. But in terms of the socio-political picture, what would you say about the transition?
Well, I would say that, you know, for a long while, our number one neighbor in terms of historical links, economic importance, Europe, has seen Africa as just a deposit of commodities. And it was pretty normal that in the other side of the Atlantic, they will just expand the same narrative. So each time that Africa was referred was about its mineral wealth or about its potential, but never about what actually is happening.
But they do think about Africa, don't they, Carlos? But in a negative way. What would you say?
Not in a negative way, in a narrow way.
In a narrow way.
In a very narrow way.
Or the predictable way by saying you've got corruption and that kind of thing. But what would you say? I mean, you look at two countries now in Africa, both of them on the Atlantic, Gambia and Ghana. God, my geography challenged here. So Ghana, you have a peaceful transition. John Mahama, the incumbent president, concedes defeat to Akufo-Addo and says fine. And then in Gambia, you've got Yahya Jammeh, who's been in power since 1994, says, okay, I lost, and then he suddenly changes. He says, I'm going to go and become a farmer. Then he changes his mind and says, actually, no, I dispute the results of the election. I'm not sure that I'm going to concede defeat to Adama Barrow.
Yeah, so, I'm saddened by it. But honestly,
but I mean, which is the right picture? The optimistic picture or the business as usual?
I'm saddened by it, but obviously it's not representative of Africa. You know, Gambia is a country of 1 million people. Africa is 1 billion. It's like the Ebola story. You know, you have three countries that represent less than 5% of Africa's GDP. And then it becomes like Africa has Ebola, you know? And it's a very small number of countries that were affected, 3. So it's always, when there is something negative about the continent, it's amplified. When there is something positive, it's diminished.
Right.
That has been our tragedy, and we need to correct that perception.
All right, so that's the way you would change mental maps. Okay, and so on. Kerry, Ambassador Kerry Buck, hello to you. Ambassador Kerry Buck is Canada's ambassador to NATO. She's previously had a stint as at the UN mission for Canada, but you joined Canadian public life in the early 1990s when you joined the Ministry of External Affairs. You've had a great deal of experience in security, when you were also involved in Canada's mission in the Afghanistan Task Force, NATO's task force, and also you've had experience dealing with Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, Caribbean, both in a security and trade capacity, so you also know about trade. You've kind of done war and human rights, I suppose, put it that way, Ambassador Kerry. So from your perspective, when we were answering the first part of our plenary discussion, the Atlantic in transition, how would you approach that from a socio-political stroke security point of view? Give us your opening thoughts.
Well, the Atlantic's always in transition. It's a pretty diverse region. But I think we're at a real turning point, potentially risky point in history, where we're moving from a period of great integration across the region, relatively great integration across the region, to a risk of disintegration. So if you, I will look at this from a perspective of security, because that's what I do. So I like to look at it as, what are people afraid of, and who do they look to keep them safe? Who do they look to give them peace? So if you wrap your mental map back 5 years, how was Europe doing? What were people in Europe afraid of? The short answer is not much. Europe was doing really well. The Balkan Wars were over. The Cold War was over. The EU and NATO were solidifying, growing, and they were starting to be a security service provider outside of Europe. So there was a higher degree of stability and integration happening in Europe. North America, NAFTA was in place. America was looking outside. America, the world's policeman, indispensable power. Look down to Latin America. The tide was turning. The way excuse me for simplifying this, but for decades in Latin America, you had a pendulum swinging between hard left and hard right governments with ongoing internal conflicts in a number of countries. And if you wrap your mind back 5 to 10 years, that pendulum had slowed down, and we were starting to see a real growth in stability and real economic growth starting to turn the corner. And the same thing, the growth rates in Africa at the time were going through the roof. They were far exceeding the rest of the West. And even in the Middle East, conflicts there were going on, but they weren't spilling out into the region. So you saw a period where there was more option or more opening for greater Atlantic integration, or at least greater common values. So wrap your mind forward now. In the last 4 years, civil conflicts, internal conflicts have quadrupled. We've got the highest number of displaced people in the world ever since we started recording this. Russia's marched into Crimea. So the way you could see the world right now, and this is more pessimistic than I actually do, but let me paint this for you. Potential fraying of Europe, at least the EU. I won't say NATO's fraying. Potential fraying of the rule of law. One small example is withdrawals from the ICC, but one big example is Russia marching into Crimea. Potential fraying of, inside a lot of states, of that outward look that you need for integration, with states starting to turn inward, and that tension between a desire to look inward and the rise of crude nationalism in some places, and what some call the liberal global order, states looking outside to integration. So I think we're really at a very delicate and difficult moment in history for the Atlantic region. Maybe opening up to Russia is an opportunity, but I think if there were a Latvian on this panel, you'd have a wildly different analysis of that opportunity.
I mean, given that Crimea was the first sort of land grab in Europe since the Second World War, and obviously, you know, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, Jens Stoltenberg's predecessor as Secretary General was, extremely upset when that happened and so on. How do you think the NATO alliance might see the fact that a new president in the United States may be inclined to be a bit more forgiving of Russia?
Two comments. First, at the Warsaw summit that NATO leaders met in July, it was really clear that there are serious concerns about Russia's aggressive behavior. It goes beyond Crimea. It's destabilization. One minister called it the Putinization of some of our own countries, cyber attacks, etc. So there's real concern on one hand, but a recognition that Russia's in Europe, Russia isn't going away. We have to work with Russia, we have to talk to Russia. I mean, Canada and Russia, between us, 75% of the Arctic. We have good cooperation with them on the Arctic, for instance. So we have to talk to Russia. We'll have dialogue with Russia. Very soon we'll have dialogue with Russia when I leave here. But the integration that had happened before with Russians sitting at the table in NATO meetings, they weren't NATO members, but there was a very robust structure of cooperation. That's gone. And it's gone because of that violation of international law. What Mr. Candidate-elect Trump intends, the campaign was a time of many different pronouncements, and we will work with the new U.S., as Canada will work with the new U.S. administration. Where he's going to land on that policy continuum between, a few wild extremes during the campaign, we don't know. And the other comment is many U.S. presidents have started off their mandates looking for a reset with Russia. They've been disappointed. We'll see.
But it is potentially going to have a biggest impact, the biggest contributor to NATO, maybe seeing a shift of policy under them. President Duhalde, of course, President Duhalde was president of Argentina for a couple of years, 2002 to 2003, I think. Prior to that, sir, you were vice president under President Carlos Menem in his first term, and you were also a mayor, so you also know about local government, and you also know about international relations because you were president also of Mercosur, which of course is the conglomeration organization of Latin American states. So when you look at your part of the world within this question, the transition, one has to think of Brazil, the biggest and most influential, arguably, country on the continent. And when you see what's gone on there, you do really get the feeling that this is a country in transition that's kind of retrenching, that's looking inwards much more. If you simply look at their Africa policy, for instance, we know that Brazil has really retreated in a great way from engaging with Africa in all sorts of ways. So when we talk about the Atlantic in transition, what are your views with your knowledge of your part of the world?
Bueno, yo tengo una convicción. Está relacionada con que el presidencialismo que todos los países iberoamericanos han asumido está dando
and presidentialism in all Southern American countries is becoming obsolete. 250 years ago, the United States established a system where those who governed were an official party and there was an official opposition, and they seemed perfectly natural. But now, in the light of organized crime or challenges to morality and the new technological era, and especially the major developments in IT, there are now models emerging where opposition, informal opposition parties join formal ones, I believe this calls for a new paradigm where those who lose and those who win elections govern together, which would have been inconceivable in the past, in light of past events. But I believe this is not a theory, this is a practice. When I first became governor of the largest province in Argentina, I said from this day, these two following words are forbidden: opposition and official government parties. There are two important things: those that control and those that govern. If you've lost the elections, your role is to monitor justice, monitor fiscal issues. And after 5 presidencies, I became the president of the Republic. I would not have done it if the previous president, Alfonsín, had not committed to create a co-government with me, with the opposition. With the opposition, we agreed on bipartisan measures. The formal opposition and the formal government, we worked together. There was a large crisis, but the answer was bipartisanship. I believe that any country that wants to create a countrywide, a national project must call upon bipartisanship. Look at Merkel in Germany, who won the elections with 45%, but created a grand coalition that gathers 85% of voices.
Much more interesting to whatever question it was you were answering, but fine. What you say is very interesting. So are you saying that the kind of winner-takes-all approach, whereby, you just address your core voters, be it the Trump supporters, be it Brexit in the UK, where the government says, we've got to make sure we carry out our mandate to respect the Brexit vote, that is a trend that you don't like? Is that what you're saying? And that really we should have a more inclusive agenda, and just having this tyranny of the majority, whereby you say, I won the election, that's fine, I'm just going to, deal with the concerns of my core supporters. That's not a way for progress, you think, nationally, regionally, and also on a wider international basis?
No. Voy a ser claro. Voy a intentar ser claro. Yo digo que antes de la elección,
is that before elections,
deben ponerse de acuerdo las fuerzas políticas en qué
political
proyecto de nación van a encarar
forces
la idea
must
es
agree
que en las crisis
on the project that the nation will build. A national project must gather all political forces. In South America,
Before I go to the audience, and I'd like you to, you've heard what our 4 panel members have said, so please do think of things that you'd like to pick up. I think you don't need me to summarize. I think you're all very clever people. You know the points that they were making. But before I do that, Kerry, you wanted to come back, yeah?
Yeah. What comes to mind, Mr. President, is that to have that system you describe work, you need the political center alive and well. And what we're seeing in parts of Europe is the political center disappearing or weakening, and extremes starting to take more political hold. And I think part of that reason is because of a growing crisis of confidence in our institutions, whether they're national governments or international, supranational, international organizations. So the big question for us, if we're looking for better integration, is what's the source of that crisis of confidence, and how do you address it?
And what's the answer to your own question? What's that source of the crisis of confidence, and how would you address it?
Well,
and then I'll let you answer.
Okay, all right. So in international organizations, I think, at least from a security perspective, those institutions that are 67 years old have seen changed security landscape, changed security threats, they're stretched to their limits, and so they've had to adapt. There have been reviews over the last 3 or 4 years, 3 reviews, peacekeeping, peacebuilding, women, peace and security in the UN, new human rights plan coming out of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and NATO adapting. And what the recognition is, and we're not there yet, is that you have to take a human-centered approach when you're trying to address security concerns. So if you take that human-centered approach and start to talk to people and listen to people and frame it that way, I think that even at the national level, you might be able to retool some of those political pitfalls that are gutting the center.
Okay. Very quickly, Mr. President, and then we'll go to the floor.
No escuché todo porque hay un problema con. Sí, pero quiero decirle sí. ¿Escucha bien?
I would like to.
Quiero decirle que
I would like.
son los políticos.
Yes.
Eso es lo que piensa el 88% de los europeos.
I believe that 80%, or in Spain we reached 93%. Traditional political parties were rejected in Spain. In America, something similar is happening. Traditional political parties are being rejected, are being widely rejected. And in Europe also. I believe that politicians must realize that they are the problem and they must change. What is sure is that the traditional system does not work for presidential systems. I'm talking about South America here. Generally speaking, these systems do not work. These problems are difficult to solve, but we must start from a solid grounding. The presidential system in South America does not function
anymore. And by the way, you can also, these gadgets you have and these apps and whatnots, you can put things, comments and questions on those, but I don't see why you should be bashful. So can I see some hands, please, as to wanting to pick up some of the points we've heard? Crisis of politicians, changing the mental map, putting Africa on the map, the shift in terms of Russia, the biggest Atlantic power, what's gone on there, the upset it might deliver. So I'll take 2 or 3 at a time, and then we'll go. So if I go to the young man with the scarf, and then I'll come to you, my dear Nick, and then I'll come to the man in the pink shirt. If you could wait for the microphone and stand and introduce yourself and your organization if relevant, and not too long. Sorry? Can you do it in... What, you just asked me that in English? Duh. He's got translation, so perhaps most people don't speak Spanish. Yes, thank you. Who's your question? Just make your point, yeah, and not too long, please.
Okay, perfect. Thank you to the president for the points he made about Latin America. I'm Eduardo from Colombia. Being conscious that now our region is facing a crisis, we see how the democracies in different countries are facing some struggles, and that the union between all the countries is not really working well. The presidential system might not be the best one. Which suggestion do you have to have more cohesive cooperation between all the countries in the region? And also, which mechanism can we have instead of presidential election to have a more powerful kind of region and to make Latin America a reference for the whole world?
Okay.
Thank you.
You have 3 questions there you got in about 90 seconds. So what you're talking about, decentralization of power to make the position of the president less powerful and stronger regional grouping? Yeah? Oh, God. Is that what you meant? Well, not quite.
I meant more in the sense he was meaning that having this system of electing a president was not being powerful at this precise moment. So which other option do we have in the region? A parliamentarian system, or what does he have in mind?
Right, okay. I think we've got that. Yeah, Nick Gowing, broadcaster. Thanks.
Have been, yes. I'm now a visiting professor as well. I travel the world as well. What I want to do is shamelessly, if I may, Kareem, pick up on what Kareem said about the project I'm doing on thinking the unthinkable, because it provides a lot of the answers to what you're speculating about. When you talk to leaders now, they have been thrown off balance by the enormity of what we've heard from Ambassador Buck. And it's a very human problem of the old normal no longer being there and adapting to it at very high speed. So when we talk about mental maps, it's actually a frailty and a vulnerability which has been created by the end of the conformity, which got all of you and everyone in this room probably to the jobs they have. And that's a very serious problem, trying to understand that. And when you mention Secretary General Rasmussen of NATO, of course in NATO, they all had an idea that Putin might invade Crimea and seize it, but they didn't believe it would ever happen. And these are the unthinkables, and the ambassador's nodding there. A lot of this is no longer secure information, but this is what you're seeing time and time again. And I come to you with 3,500 pages of transcript from leaders who are saying exactly this. This is a whole new world.
Thank you very much indeed for that comment. Very forcefully put. Nick, thank you. Was there anybody in this middle section? Chap there. And microphone? There's another couple there. We'll take one and then we'll go back to the panel. Yes, please.
Yes, hello. I'm Yusuf Kobo. I'm a communication advisor for the Christian Democrats in Belgium. So I'm actually the literal political center in Europe. So Ms. Buck, you were talking about eroding confidence in our institutions. That's why the political center is weakening in Europe and also in the United States. But where do you think this lack of confidence by the population in our institutions come from? Is it from one of those elephants in the room we're not talking about? Is it migration? Is it rising inequality? So where does this lack of confidence come from?
Okay, let's pick that up with you straight away, Ambassador Buck. And the lack of confidence, where does it come from? And then the young man from Latin America, from Colombia, about, you know, whether we ought to rethink some of the systems we have, presidential to parliamentary, and so on.
There's so many sources of people feeling disaffected. So giving you 1, 2, or 100 answers to why people have that crisis of confidence, I think one big reason is 2008. And I think there are economic drivers that we tend to count, but maybe not count enough. So if you look before, for instance, the Arab awakening, it was predicted when you looked at high youth unemployment, particularly among young males, some economic downturns and a spike in food prices. Now, there are many, many, many other reasons, but if you add those things up, you can see that there's a sense of people not counting, not being respected, and losing economically. And then politicians can take advantage of that and whip up a kind of nationalism. I think it takes a different kind of leader. You know, I gave you the example of human-centered approach to peace interventions by the UN, but you know, we've got a political discourse now that focuses on validating diversity and inclusion. I think that's a really important message. Or Jens Stoltenberg after the terrorist attack in Norway. His answer back was, we are going to express more love for our fellow Norwegians right now. I mean, that's statesman-like leadership, and that helps turn that tide of disaffection, I think.
That was when he was Prime Minister, of course. Yeah. Mr. President, just briefly, I mean, Latin America, that question from Colombia, the strong man or woman, the strong president that has been so much a feature of your continent, perhaps shift to a parliamentary system, and the idea was to strengthen regional groupings. So in the context of the Atlantic dialogues, is it retreating into a smaller grouping rather than, reaching out to the whole Atlantic? Briefly, if you would, on those. And then I'd like to come to these two chaps here, because you haven't had a chance to say very much.
Bueno, en primer lugar, hablar de Colombia es hablar de un país que después de 60 años logró la paz.
For many years now, Colombia has established peace. President Santos just received the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think this should be applauded here. The young man was asking a question concerning presidentialism, which has not worked for the two reasons that I mentioned. It was created for a system with two parties. This system is based on two parties, and it does not work anymore. What should this system be replaced with? I believe we should all get together and agree that it does not work anymore. Call upon experienced people that both the winner and the loser of elections can have a role, an official role in finding solutions to crises. Permanent quarrels between losers and winner mean that solutions are neglected.
A kind of thumbnail sketch of how you see the situation from your own perspectives, and we've talked about some of the challenges, the crisis in political leadership and so on. So if you would both comment on that, but also perhaps give us some ideas as to how we can overcome these problems, as President Duhalde has there. Do you want to go first? Paolo?
No, just to mention about political differences and why nations are voting with a fatigue, at least feeling. Globalization killed ideologies because role of nation-state decisions it's lower than before. Austerity killed the room of maneuver for differences between the center-left and the center-right, who usually rule the nations in Europe. And you have a serious ideological and political problem because a lot of people in Europe can't find real differences between the traditional rulers who are conservatives and social democrats. That's one point. This is a very serious problem and explains some of the temptations of extremism. Because you have, I know there's a tendency for forgiven populists from the left and penalize populists from the right. Both are horrible and populists. And don't forget, the first populist, let me just tell you one thing.
Podemos in Spain is horrible?
No, obviously. Do you think it's a good thing to have an anarchist party with 25% of the vote?
They say they just represent the voice of the people. The five-star movement in Italy is horrible?
Spain has also, it's a sign of a disease. Do you know what is the good solution for populists would be to give them power for 3 months, okay? And you will note very quickly that those magic solutions were not for tomorrow. But the risk of giving them power in a country with the national problem like Spain, in Catalonia, in Basque Country, which is the third or the fourth largest economy in Europe, it wouldn't have good consequences. So just one thing about Europe, we discuss it here, and the young person from Belgium mentioned the question of the center. You have obviously a lack of leadership, which is also the consequence of the lack of differences. Okay, you have a lack of leadership. For the moment, you have Chancellor Merkel. You have to wait for French elections and German elections. 2017, to deal with Europe, it's almost a lost year because you have two major elections. Second, note how culturally Europe is in a very bad shape. I would say the worst moment I know or I remember, because happily I don't have the memory of leaving the two wars.
Yeah.
Now you have in Europe, you have the highest, just 1 minute, the highest demographic crisis in European history. You need 2 sons per mother to replace generations and give sustainability through social policies. You have in Europe 1.5. You don't have children, and you are against migrants, against immigrants. Europe decision procedure collapsed because of 1 displaced refugees. How many refugees you have in Jordan? How many refugees you have in Turkey? You have, just in Africa, 17.5 displaced people. And the European sophisticated political decision procedure collapsed with 1 million refugees. Do you know how many are distributed? Of those famous 160,000, just 5% were distributed. It's a shaming for an European. It's a shaming. And so you don't have children. You are against immigrants. You protest every day for granted rights for everybody, every time. With what money? And finally, now you are against free trade. So, as the Canadian Prime Minister said, in a very ironic way, but if Europe doesn't want a trade agreement with Canada, Europe wants a trade agreement with whom?
Yeah.
So
it was only the Walloons in Belgium that held it up,
We are very
they
critical
gave up.
to Americans, but
Yeah.
they have the double of the economic growth and 50% of our unemployment.
I was just saying, Europe did want it. It was just
So
the
you
Walloon
need
little
leaders, and you need
piece
leaders, and
in
you
Belgium.
need political fighters and will.
All right.
What
Thank you.
do you want?
Thank you.
To okay, so
yeah.
this is not a very.
So Europe in retreat, Carlos. Does that concern you when you said obviously
It's
Africa
a
has
fascinating discussion.
Yeah.
But seen from an African perspective, there are 3 types of disruption that we are living today. The first disruption has been very well presented by Paulo, is the demographic disruption. It's actually a disruption that is in favor of Africa because we are going to have the repository of youth of the world. If you project in just about 40 years, not only will have the largest labor force, surpassing China and India, but we are also going to have the youngest population in the world and about 60% of the young people in the world. If Europe, that currently has 25% of its population 65 or older, and is projected to have by 2065 3/4 of its population 65% and older, and Japan is going to be even more accelerated in that direction. If they really think this is the future, well, what we are witnessing with negative interest rates is just the beginning, because it will signify aversion to risk to such a proportion that you are going to have a complete uncharted territory on macroeconomics.
So you're saying change mental maps within the Atlantic dialogues in Europe so that they understand that for their own self-interest, they need to be more welcoming.
That's what Paulo, and I absolutely
But how
agree.
do you do that?
But what is interesting is that this is not just confined to Europe. Aging is also going to contaminate other parts of the world, except Africa and India. So even Latin America is already aging very fast.
Even Brazil.
And I think that if we don't prepare for that change, we are going to face incredible unpreparedness to this disruption, the demographic disruption.
Okay. Yeah.
That's one. The second disruption is technological. Obviously, a lot of people think that the way to compensate for lack of young people is to transfer value from the traditional production of goods to first intellectual property and now to the financial sector. That worked for a while, but it has gotten stuck with the issue of distribution because your social security systems cannot survive with robots and automation. Robots don't pay social security. You see, that's the problem. So if you have the beneficiaries higher than the contributors all the time, and it's increasing the gap, you are going to have a major difficulty. This difficulty is accelerated by the fact that for the first time in human history, the progress of technological disruption, like the ones we are witnessing today, is not increasing productivity in the largest economies. They are stuck in terms of productivity. So how are you going to change this equation? Obviously, by not concentrating only on the upper hand of the scale in terms of technology, but also introducing frugal technology, making sure that you democratize the access, like the mobile banking in Africa, that is the leader. So that's the second disruption. The third disruption is financial. We have such a concentration of power in the hands of a few that today 1% of the population that is the richest in the planet has as much income as half of the planet. And obviously people are seeing this and say, what is this? So indirectly, these three disruptions question completely representational democracy as we are used to. And indirectly, as Carrie was saying, institutions. Because the institutions were based in the Westphalian principles. They were based on sovereign states being able to create, the regulatory systems inside. And those were market systems in most of the cases. And those market systems were very much anchored in a democratic dispensation that is now collapsing.
Right. But you're just saying, very quickly so I can go to the audience, you're saying really that the countries that need a young injection of labour and workers and students or whatever should be more welcoming, particularly those from Africa.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau, when he wrote...
Is that what you're saying? That they should welcome the Africans, let the migrants in? Is that what you're saying?
I'll put it graphically.
You were very well till Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
I'll put it graphically. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 250 years ago, wrote the social contract. What was the social contract about? It was basically passing the principle of solidarity from the family dimension to the national dimension. When you discuss today sustainable development, you are basically saying that the current generation has to have solidarity with the successor generation, which is the same principle. But who are the young people of the successor generation? They will be in Africa and India.
Right, okay, but that's going to be, we understand the economic reasons. We know the Rousseau underscores that. But do you really think that Europe and the others are going to open
It was
their...
a little bit authoritarian.
So your solution is to open
what I'm saying
doors.
is that the reason why we are in this mood of resistance to migrants and all the rest is because for the first time, this solidarity is not being exercised within the borders. It has to be exercised, if you are, respecting the principle, with people that are outside your borders. Africans, Indians, you don't want to do it. That's why it's not working.
All right.
But Carlos,
you've got to be nice to Africans because they're going to be the ones who fire your economies. Can I see some hands, please, on these comments? Thank you. They can be comments as well as questions. You've got the microphone, and then if I could have some microphones here and there. We'll take a jumble of comments. Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm Alfredo Valadao, from professor at Sciences Po and senior fellow at CP Policy Center. I would just like to say that it seems to me that Trump's election is a good opportunity, at least on security terms, because we've been, Europeans, Africans, and South Americans, have been used to criticizing America, but also to rely on America's security umbrella. Now Trump is saying, that's finished. If you have real problems, you solve them themselves. We will only get in if it really threatens us directly. So no more American cavalry, no more ring-tin-tin. So we are facing the fact that we have to take our responsibilities. And I think it's a very good thing that we have the opportunity to grow up. And when we grow up, we have to talk to each other and say how it... The Europeans, Europe would not exist if it wasn't for the American umbrella. So when Trump says, okay, if you want to be defended, you have to pay, fair enough. You have to put boots on the ground, fair enough. So now you have to put your act together.
Okay.
Everybody has to put their act together.
Thanks for that point. Yeah, although we saw that a bit with Obama when he said to the Europeans, you deal with Libya because it's your backyard, nothing to do with me. And Britain and Sarkozy, France went in, of course. So it's more of the same. Okay, thank you for that comment. They can be comments, by the way. Yes.
Preguntarle al señor Porta.
¿Y cómo te llamas?
Yeah,
Te
briefly, if you
permito
would. I
preguntar,
see you
ministro
holding something
de
up.
Industria y
No
Comercio de
speeches.
República Dominicana. Cuando usted se refirió a la victoria de Trump, solamente
When you
tocó
referred
el
to
tema
Trump's victory,
relacionado con Rusia. Pero la victoria de Trump, en gran medida, implica un cuestionamiento severo a los fundamentos de la globalización. Es un cuestionamiento a los flujos libres de comercio. Es un
this
cuestionamiento
calls
a los
into
flujos libres
question
capitales.
the basis of globalization and the free circulation of capital and people.
Thank you. Yes,
Are
Stan,
we in a
we'll take that as a
new
comment too, and then I'll let you come for your
paradigm?
closing comments at the end panel.
Yeah, thank you. My name is José Brito. I'm the Brazilian ambassador to Morocco. I would just like to make a brief comment both on the idea of changing mental maps and also the idea of elephants in the room. But first of all, I'd like to say how glad I am to see President Duhalde present here, because precisely I think what Brazil and Argentina did in the 80s and the 90s was a memorable example of changing mental maps, because both Brazil and Argentina used to look rather to the United States and to Europe, and they started to see, well, we are neighbors and we should do business together. And nowadays, it's unthinkable to do anything in integration in South America if it's not based on the partnership that was built between Brazil and Argentina. So I'm glad to see President Duhalde here. But my very brief comment is that I think there's a big elephant that perhaps is not in the room, and it is trade between South America and Africa. If you see the publication that was launched this morning, it has a very interesting statistical annex, and it shows how little trade between South America and Africa is. So from my own perspective as ambassador here, I would say that there is a dimension of neighborhood between South America and Africa that is somehow invisible, and that we have to learn on both sides of the South Atlantic to see that neighborhood and to understand its potential. I mean, why are cars made in Morocco not sold in Brazil? Why is Brazilian beef not sold in Morocco? I mean, we should ask those questions, and I think that is a big elephant that is not
You're
in the room.
absolutely right,
Thank you.
especially Brazil, which in terms of Africa has the second largest population of Africans outside after Nigeria, when you think of your African diaspora. Who's got the microphone? And there's anybody here? Yeah. Is there any, could you give the microphone? Yeah, okay. Brief comments, please. Yes, sir, brief.
Hola, buenas tardes. Me preguntaba el presidente Duhalde. Y usted habló de cooperación y de relaciones entre África y Sudamérica. Y dando la distancia enorme geográficamente entre las dos regiones, ¿no le parece a usted más importante que haya una relación triangular? ¿No le parece que Marruecos, por ejemplo, es un país que tiene estrechas y históricas relaciones con los países de África?
Who has close relationships with African countries, especially Western Africa, and Spain, which has historical ties and very close ties with South America, might there be a triangular cooperation between Morocco and Spain.
Morocco was in Africa and is an African country, but
and
anyway.
It's back to African Union.
Yes,
Not yet, but will be. Will be.
My name is Eduardo. I'm a broadcaster, and my comment question goes to you, Mr. Lopez, because we've interacted on these issues. And so picking up on the opportunities that the Trump presidency portends for Africa, you are part of the reforms going on at the African Union. To what extent, as Africans, do we interpret the Trump presidency as an opportunity? We have the former President Obasanjo here, and you know that he, along with Mbeki and others, talked about the African Renaissance. And it just seems as if we're carrying on with the same narrative, okay, and squandering the opportunity that this absence from Africa's absence from the Trump imagination offers to us.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Susana Carrillo from the World Bank. And my comment is related to the conversation and the statements made on the population trends. If you look at Africa, as Mr. Lopez said, it has the highest growing youth population, but it also has the highest unemployment rate among youth. South Africa I think is the number one. Last year I had the pleasure to be present in the World Skills Competition in Sao Paulo. Yeah. And it was astonishing to me to see that there were no delegations from African youth, and maybe one or two from Latin America. Sure. And there were mostly from Korea, Japan, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Germany.
Yeah, we get it.
How do you change the mental maps of politicians in these countries to invest more on youth skills development?
Thank you. Whoa, that's a long answer. We might just get a headline on that. So I'll take one more here and one lady there. Okay. Could you give the microphone? Have you got the microphone? Yeah.
All right. I'm Obajide.
Quickly.
Obajide from Nigeria. So just a quick one. I think Trump's election of Donald Trump is good. Okay. Very good. I agree with Professor Alberto there, who said that it makes us know that there's an awakening. There's something real that's happening. And that thing that's happening is to make us grow up. Okay. So now we get to grow up. We get to know that even though Donald Trump is saying no to diversity, no to globalization, just trying to take us back to where we are coming from, back to the 1800s, it's time for us to grow up. And the changing mental maps that we're all talking about should be us redetermining what that mental map is meant to be as Africans.
And just look inwards and
look inwards. Then
relish your own.
Yeah. Then quickly, Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I thought that was a quickly.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin would always be Vladimir Putin. Okay. I heard the Putinization. I don't think any opening up or anything is actually going to change anything with Russia. I think now you can go to lower cadre people in the cabinet and see how you can start discussions with them.
Thank you.
Right?
Just one point now, because we're running out of time.
Okay. I'll try and be quick.
Be quick.
It seems to me that at the heart of the Atlantic insecurity is actually the displacement of traditional centers of power. And that doesn't seem to be something that we're really speaking about. Everyone points to China as the elephant in the room, but I actually, from my research, the elephant in the room is the lack of self-critical reflection on the part of traditional centers of power in terms of how they engage with the global south, how they engage with Africa.
Thank you. Oh, a lot on Africa. Yes?
Hi. Manjeet Kripalani from India. We're from the optimistic side of the world. And I agree with the lady who just spoke that I think the elephant in the room is a mindset with the traditional holders of powers. And I believe that with the arrival of India and China on the global scene, there are other options for countries like countries in Latin America and Africa. And Argentina is going to be the head of the G20 next year. So maybe Argentina will start to play a more positive role in the new world order and the change that is coming.
We've had so many elephants in the room. We've got a herd of them. I'm worried I'm going to be mowed down by them any minute now. Panel, your closing comments, please. I'll start with you, Ambassador Karen Buck. You heard some points there, traditional rulers, the elites or whatever being challenged, but also opportunities seen for Africa and also for Europeans to seize control of their own defence and so on and so forth. Just your closing comments, please, for just a minute or two.
Can I answer the point on defence spending in one sentence? Sure. You're right. Trump's messaging about Europe, take care of your own defense spending, is a very good one. It's a very positive one. Last year was the first time defense spending started to rise again, but he also didn't say you're on your own. He also said, I'm all for NATO. So I mean, it's in America's security interest to be in Europe. We moved back into Europe this year after an absence of 2 decades. Canada did.
Yeah.
So,
but how many European countries spend that 2% of their GDP on defence? Not even mighty Germany does it, frankly.
Greece and
it's
Turkey.
like, huh?
Greece and Turkey.
Exactly. Even mighty Germany. But anyway, fine, that was just a
and
little
there are
aside.
other metrics. How much do you spend on salary as opposed to how much you, close to 20% procurement, but I won't get into it. So, on that point about traditional centers of power, I don't know what you mean by that. You could mean one of two things. You could mean power moving away from the West over to India, Africa, etc. Or the way I see it is power moving away from the nation state. I talked about a fraying of international organizations, a fraying of the power of the nation state, but don't despair. I actually think our mistake is trying to interpret the nation state power as that old Westphalian model. What we're living in now is a world of networks, where people have to network across borders, as you said, to express themselves politically, economically. Nation states have to work more in integration, and international organizations have to work in an overlapped network of international organizations, and that's okay. But we need to get into those networks more. When I said more human-centered approach to peace and security, it's actually very practical how you do that. I won't get into it. But the idea is that you have to reach out to the people you're trying to help and stop just playing at the nation-state level or at the international organizational level. So I think it's a viable project.
Thank you. Very quickly, President Duhalde, Argentina going to be in the presidency of the G20. Last comment there. Opportunity for you to really seize the agenda. If you could just frame your answer within the Atlantic dialogues. Thank you.
No he entendido lo que me preguntó porque sigue sin funcionar esto. De todas maneras,
so,
quiero
I'm not think I could answer because I didn't
diciendo que no ha sido hacia mi persona,
the question completely and didn't understand it fully.
Sudamérica está en un
So I'm
proceso
not talking about me, but I'm talking about South America, which is in a very important process. We had 400,000 students in 1950. We have now 14 million people. We have many young people, as it has been said for Africa. And we believe that these meetings such as this and meetings...
Thank you very much indeed, Mr.
wanted
President.
to thank you.
Carlos Lopez. We
I
heard a
think
lot.
that the meetings
So,
such
one
as these
particular
are an
point.
excellent
Africa's not made the
moment
most of
to
its
discuss
demographic
an excellent
dividend,
forum
and
to
you've got all
discuss
this
these
growth that you were
issues, and I'd like
talking
to
about,
thank
but
the
it's been
presidency.
jobless growth, in particular youth unemployment.
Well, it has not been jobless growth. It's the fact that we have such a huge increase in population. You have to not just create as many jobs for those who already exist, but for the growth that is coming all the time. So that's why you have this feeling that there is no progress. There's a lot of progress. In fact, poverty has been reduced by about 6%, which is enormous if you take into account the stock plus the addition during the last 15 years. But what I want really to mention, and it covers a lot of the comments that were made about Africa, is that there is always misperceptions about the continent. I'll just pick 2 from the interventions. You know, we only have 12 African countries that are up to date with the methodological standards that are required for national accounts, which means that all statistics that you have on employment are false. So you just have approximations. We have this perception that China is so important. Yes, it's our #1 trading partner in the continent. But when it comes to investment, the #1 country is still the US.
And it puts more in Latin America than it does actually in Africa, doesn't it?
No, and in fact, you know, if you look into the growth of FDI, greenfield FDI, in the last 3 years, we have beaten Latin America. Africa has beaten Latin America in terms of attractiveness and flows. So I think it's, you know, we have this impression sometimes that are collated from, you know, newspapers, media coverage, that is very biased when it comes to Africa.
But, you know, to be fair, when you look at the 2 big power engines in Africa, Nigeria and South Africa, their economies are really tanking.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's a very good point, because if you take those two out plus Egypt, that's the third largest, the second largest, you have 4.4% growth this year.
There's a lot of people you're taking out, though, Carlos.
Yes,
but anyway.
but look at the characteristics that are behind what is happening in these three countries, and then you'll see that the picture is not really the half empty part of the glass that you should mirror, but rather 4.4% under the current circumstances is quite a respectable growth.
Thank you very much. And I should just give the demographic. I love this statistic. I think it's a World Bank one. The average age in Japan is 44. In the UK, it's 40. In Uganda, it's 15. Yes. Paolo, your closing comments, please, briefly, if you would.
What is very bizarre is to decrease age of retirement when hope of life is increasing significantly, because happily you have 10 more years of lifetime expected for men and 11 for women if you compare with the 60s. And you are decreasing the age of retirement? What are you going to do in the last 25 or 30 years of your life? Is the family, the society, and the state prepared for? Okay, those are real questions. There's not a question from the right or from the left. It's fact. Okay. Second, just to give a notion, an idea of hope, I personally think, I know very well the continent, not so well than Carlos, but I personally think that Africa could and should be for global growth what Asia was in the last quarter of the 20th century, in the 21st. If, with two ifs, political stability and juridical stability. Those are the conditions to attract the enormous potential. Can you imagine, for instance, you are moving from rural society to urban society in Africa. You will have more than, if I'm right, 15 towns with more, at least 15 million people or more.
Sure.
Can you imagine what is the level of development on water, energy, infrastructures, housing, waste, etc. you will have to build? This is, if Europe is able to look in co-development to Africa, it could be in co-development without any kind of condescendence. Colonial times are over. This is cooperation between sovereign states. And finally, an idea of hope. We are in Morocco. This is a chaotic world, a very complex world. Morocco is a very unique referential of stability in Maghreb and Mediterranean border.
Okay.
Is the unique case of bringing together religious and political legitimacy that works for stability. It's the only country with Spain, Moratinos is there, that was able to manage with success what 10 years ago was a drama, migration problems in the border with Europe. In Spain and Morocco, it was possible to solve the problem.
Okay.
Europe should pay attention how the Moroccans acted.
We're very happy to end on a note
this is a good sign of hope. And
Paolo, thank you.
Last statement. And it's becoming obviously the regional power in Western Africa. That's very good for African Union to have Morocco back and your reforms in African Union.
Okay, so very nice to end this session on a note of optimism and hope. As somebody who was born on an African continent, I'm very happy that you see the future with Africa. Think, bridge, stimulate. We hope we've done that. Think, stimulate, bridge. We've talked about so many things that I won't even dare summarize, and in any case, I don't have the time. Thank you very much indeed to my panel. Thank you to all of you for the contributions. Coffee break, and then you reconvene for the next session. Thank you. Thank you, Paolo. Very nice.
Bye.
Woo.